Yeah. So let me introduce myself first. Hello, I'm Nick, living in Montreal. I'm a consultant at Zenica, and I work with React Native since like the very beginning of React Native, like 5 years ago, I think. And before that, I was working with React. And last year, I saw that Flutter was gaining some traction, so I decided to look at it. I went on Flutter.dev and found that page, Flutter for React Native developers. And I was like, cool, that's for me, right? So I read that, and this page enumerates some concepts, some areas where React Native and Flutter do things. And say, hey, you are a React Native developer, so you are probably used to do things like this. So, well, in Flutter, it's more like that, etc. It explains the differences, it explains why there is a difference, etc. And at the end of the read, quite a long read, I was like blown away. I mean, I was like, okay, this is going somewhere. So I decided to learn about Flutter, trying it, doing some side project, etc. And from March this year, I had a chance to work with Flutter, and I'm enjoying it so far. So yeah, 2020 has not been all shitty for me. That's good. And here I am working, talking about this transition. Just to check, can you give me a +1 in the chat if you can hear me okay, if you see my slide? Cool. So the only thing you don't see is my face, but it's not a big loss, right? I've structured my presentation in a very classic way, things that are completely similar between those two, things that requires a bit of learning, things that I thought I knew, but I actually didn't, and things that are still a bit hard for me, where I miss React Native a little bit. First thing first, similar concept between those two, and let's start with the most important one, which is building UI. That's what React Native and Flutter are all about. So in React Native and in React, by the way, you have this concept of reactive programming. The name itself comes from there. And it means that you have an input state, the data, actually the content you want to display on your page, on your screen. And you have that transformation where your data is translated into UI. And UI is the output state. So you have your data input state, and it corresponds to an output state, the UI. If the data change, the UI change, React and Flutter keeps the UI in sync with your content. So for React specifically, you write component. So component is a class. You give it some props, that's your input state, and you write the render function, most important function of the React component. And that implements the logic to transform that props into UI. And the render function returns virtual DOM, which is a data structure that is later translated into DOM for the web or native component for React Native. And Flutter is the exact same deal. You write widget. Widget is a class. Widget has some arguments as input state. And you write the build method, which is a very equivalent of the render method. And the build method returns elements that are later translated into render objects that are later displayed by the engine. So implementing UI is the exact same thing. And that's quite a big deal because that's what the framework are used to. It means that as a React Native developer, you are immediately able to build UI in Flutter, like day one. You know, if your designer gives you a mockup, you immediately know how to split your widget, the best practices are the same, and you are able to translate that into a widget tree. You are also able to see that some area in your UI is recurrent, and you are able to reuse widget, etc., etc. And that's great. Other thing you are comfortable with when you enter Flutter is third-party integration. Flutter and React Native are both cross-platform frameworks. They are very different in their architecture, but when it comes to interacting with the native side, they are very similar. They both have host applications. So when you create, when you generate a React Native project and when you generate your Flutter project, you have an Android directory containing an Android app, an iOS directory containing an iOS app. And when you have to deal with those host applications, you integrate plugins. And with years of React Native development, I work on like 10, 12 different applications. And inevitably, I'm used to integrate some plugins very commonly used, like Crashlytics, Analytics, Secure Storage, Preferences, etc. Sometimes Google Map, and so on. Push notification, permission, location, etc. So it's the exact same thing in Flutter. I go through the exact same process. And the integration is very lookalike as well. For example, Crashlytics is a good example. If you drop the Crashlytics plugin into a React Native app, it works. You have crash reports, but they are not so useful if you don't wire the JavaScript error to your report. Exact same thing in Dart. If you don't wire the Dart exception to your report, you don't have a clear crash report. So same process. Same thing with Google Maps, same requirements, etc. And I even have a situation once where I have an issue, a bug in my app with push notification, if I remember well. And I found a workaround for my Flutter app in the React Native plugin repository for Firebase push notification. So yeah, shared that with my team, thought I was mistaken, but yeah, it works for us as well. So I have duplicate slide, maybe. Anyway, yeah, React Native integration, when it's come to native, both are the same. And it's also quite a big deal because knowing how to interact with those host applications is what makes you a React Native, an experienced React Native developer. So it means that if you come to Flutter, that experience is not wasted. You can be an experienced Flutter developer on day one as well. Cool. So yeah, things that need a bit of adjustment period, quick learning curve. Let's start with the most obvious part, the language itself, Dart. I love Dart. It's a modern language, fully fledged features, etc. Dart is quite old, actually, because it started far before Flutter. And I see it as an experimental language that has found its true meaning with Flutter. Overall, the experience is very similar to JavaScript. You have a lot of same concept. Dart transpiled to JavaScript, by the way. And it's even more similar if you learn TypeScript, because you have a type inference system built in Dart, which is very similar to TypeScript. Same experience, same confidence in your code. So yeah. There are some things to learn. For me, it was name arguments. I never seen that before. It doesn't exist in JavaScript or TypeScript or even in Java. I made a bit of Java before. And also, constructor was a bit weird to me at first because there is a lot of shortcuts when declaring a constructor. So it took me like weeks to be able to write a constructor without copy pasting something. I think what I love the most about Dart is the fact that there is a no legacy. What I mean by that is Flutter is new, Dart is new-ish. Like I said, it's like Dart, modern Dart is new. And there is a unique way to declare widgets. If you compare with React Native and actually React, you have the React class, React.components that you extend when you create a widget with a class. And then people realize that in a React code base, like 90% of components, were just class with a render function in it. So they were like, okay, how about creating a component with just that function? And here came the functional component. So you can create React component with just function, which is great. Huge adoption, by the way. And then people realize that, okay, functional components are great, but it doesn't allow to do the same thing as a class. So what if we implement a new UI to work with functional component to do everything that a class can do? And here comes the hooks, latest big evolution of React. So you have basically 3 different ways to declare components. And I give some React and React Native training from time to time, and I tell people about those 3 different ways because they are commonly used, and people are confusing. They're like, what should I use? And I say, okay, choose the latest because hooks are great, right? And they say, okay, so why bothering learning class? Because they're still used and everywhere. So okay, that's why I meant by a legacy. You have years of evolution that make things a bit confusing, and you don't have that in Flutter because it's new. I only talk about the framework, but you also have the language and Dart that is new compared to JavaScript with its multiple evolutions and that duality. TypeScript versus JavaScript, it's not the same tool, syntax is a bit different. It's kind of annoying. And yeah, you have TypeScript in Dart, except it's built in. And TypeScript is heavy to configure. So a lot of different options. You need to have type definition for all your package. Sometimes are missing, sometimes are broken, sometimes are out of sync, etc., etc. You don't have that in Dart. You have type checking with 0 configuration. And I also appreciate that it's consistent with the framework source code. Flutter is 100% written in Dart. So your app is written in Dart, Flutter is written in Dart, and you can directly from your IDE navigate in the Flutter source code. And you can navigate with like command return or control return and explore the deepest layer of the framework. Next, state management. Flutter is agnostic about state management. You can do whatever you want. If you are used to MVC, MVVM, fine, it works. But I tend to think that Flutter works better with unidirectional workflow because it's consistent with how Flutter builds UI. Remember that input state and output state, it's kind of the same thing, but at the application level. Flutter provides a basic API to do that, inherited widget and change notifier. It's like the React context API, but on steroid. And part of Flutter for API works like that, like the navigator. So inherited widget exposes some data to the subtree of widget, and it is also able to refresh the subtree of widget if the data change. So that's the basic breaks of a state management system. However, that API is a bit verbose. So a package quickly emerges, and it's named provider. It's the most downloaded package on the pub repository. Well, if it's not the most downloaded, it's like in the top 3. And it provides an abstraction over inherited widget to quickly do what inherited widgets do. And you also have BLOC, which is an abstraction of a provider. It provides a stream API to easily implement some asynchronous task like performing a network request or debounce effect or whatever. I use BLOC and I'm quite happy with it. And so on. There is a lot of different state management solution, a new one every week. And it could be confusing sometimes. But the benefit is you are free to do whatever you are most comfortable with. In React Native, there is years of try and retry and evolution, etc. And nowadays, there is, I think, I don't know, 2 or 3 major state management solutions. And Redux is by far the most popular. So you have that unidirectional workflow, like I said, when your UI dispatch some action, a reducer is called to update the state, and the UI refresh itself in reaction of the state change. It's kind of the same thing with BLOC, except you have a stream of events, so you don't dispatch an action, you push an event to that stream. And you write inside the blocks the logic to emit your state in reaction of that event. And then the UI is updated. It sounds a bit more complex, but actually it's more Redux that is too simple. Because with Redux, like bare Redux, you can't handle asynchronous actions like network requests. So you have to add middleware for that. And one of the most popular middleware is Redux Saga. So it brings the concept of stream as well. And Redux plus Redux Saga is very equivalent to BLOC. However, there is still a bit of differences. Of course, the semantic, because like I said, you don't dispatch action, so you add event to a stream. It's the out-of-the-box equivalent of Redux Saga. The main difference is that the state is not unique, like in Redux. It is divided in small different pieces everywhere in your app, and it sounds a bit scary, but in an application, you can have 20, 30 blocks, and it's fine. That's how it works. Every block has its small single responsibility. And if you can think organized, it works pretty well. Blocks can be interdependent. In my app, we have blocks at the application level to handle things that are very global in my app, like authentication, configuration. And then I have page blocks. For example, if you open the search page, you create a search block. And if you open another search page, you create another search block, blank, etc. So yeah, this concept of unidirectional workflow is the same with React Native and Flutter. Both obey to the reactive paradigm, and it provides the same confidence in your application. Your app can scale without having too much complexity. It's also compliant with challenging UX. What I mean by that is even a single network request have 3 associated different states. The request can be pending, so you display a loader in your app, and then the request is successful, you display your data, and your request can fail because you are on mobile, so your user don't have a bad network or something, so you have to display a user feedback saying that your request has failed, or you can retry it, etc. Then, building UI. I said previously that, okay, I have to hurry up a little bit. I said previously that building UI is easy when you come from React Native. Actually, what is easy is to splitting your mockup into different widgets, but implementing the widgets themselves is a bit different. In React Native, you have a view with a style property, and imagine you have 8 different property in that style sheet. There is a pretty good chance that the Flutter equivalent of this is a nested a nested bunch of widgets, 8 of them, one for each property, plus one at the end, which is the widget you want to customize. So there is a widget for everything. Padding is a widget, align is a widget, center something is a widget, etc., etc. Row and column are the flexbox, the equivalent of flexbox in React Native. So it can be confusing sometimes. It could be a bit scary, by the way, because you have a lot of widgets for a simple thing. Let's use a practical use case. Let's imagine I have this list of cards. I want to build that. Okay, so I want the card disposed vertically, and I want the same space between the cards and also between the side of the screen. So let's do that in Flutter. I'm creating a list view, which is a Flutter widget for list view. I give it children attribute, which is an array, and that array contains my card, which is my widget defined somewhere else in my application. So it gives me that UI. And now I want to implement the spacing between them. So I have to separate the cards from each other and separate the card from the side of the screen. So what I can do is to give the first card the padding on all dimensions, the four sides, and give the other card the same padding except on the top, so it will lay out like I expected. What I don't like with the solution is that the first card is rendered differently than the other. It doesn't have the same age, etc. So what I will do instead is to give all the cards half the padding on all dimensions. So the bottom half padding add to the top half padding of the next card will give me the expected spacing. And if I wrap the whole list view with the same half padding, I will have the UI I want as well. So let's try this. I have this padding, like 16 pixel, and I will give half the padding to each card. So if I want to apply padding to a widget, I wrap it with a padding widget. Here we go. So now I have the correct padding between the card, but I only have half the padding with the side of the screen. At this point, you may think that, okay, but if you declare that padding inside the card, you avoid the repetition. That's true, but maybe my card is reused somewhere else in my app, and I don't have that that constraint. I have no padding or different value of padding. So padding really belongs to the parent, not to the card itself. So now next step is to give the whole list view add the padding as well. Good news is I don't have to wrap the list view with a padding widget because the list view has padding properties that does the exact same thing. So here we go. Job done. My designer is happy. My project manager is happy. Good. But actually, there is better than that. There is another approach. That was the web approach. The approach that I come up with my web background. But actually, in Flutter, you do things differently. Let's imagine you give the list the whole padding. The only thing you have to do now is to define the padding between the card. And a simple way to do that is to insert a widget between them to give the space between the cards. And it works the same UI. The code is simpler, shorter, more legible. But if you come from the web and you are used to CSS, you are like, ew, right? Because the web equivalent of this is to create empty div to have spacing between elements, and that's bad. That's not how you do it. You do it in CSS. That's what the browsers are optimized for. You don't do that. But in Flutter, it's fine because there is no CSS. you have this engine, and all the engine have to do is to draw boxes, my cards, at the expected place. So the computation needed to know where to place my cards is no regards of the engine. And the simpler it is, the better. So in that case, I have less widgets, one less, and they are simple. So that's how you do things in Flutter. This is the way, like the Mandalorian say. New episode tonight, by the way. To prove my point, there is also a shortcut on the list view to do that with a longer list. Like for now, I just have 3, but if I have a bunch of cards to display, I have a list with an item builder to render the card and separator builder to render the space. So yeah, widget composition is different than what you are used to in React Native. And the only advice I can give you is learn the API, know the widgets. First time I see the padding property on the list view, it was a teammate that know that, and he pushed a pull request, and I review that pull request, and I like, oh, a padding under a list view, interesting. And I even check the CI status. Oh, well, it doesn't compile, right? Oh, yes, it is. It's green. So, okay, there is a. I learned that there is a padding attribute to the list view. Then, finally, the others bit. In React Native, I'm used to GSX to declare UI, and there is no GSX in Dart in Flutter. In Flutter, how to declare UI, I'm using like this, a bunch of constructor. And when you come from React Native, and that's not really declarative, right? It's just a bunch of constructor nested and indented in a way to looks like declarative, but it's a bunch of constructors. So I'm not the only one who was bothered by that, and there is an issue open on the Flutter repository where there is basically 2 types of people: people who come from React, people who don't. The people who come from React say, okay, looks like look at this bunch of UI. Here is the GSX equivalent, and see, that's better. It's shorter, etc. And people who don't come from React are like, no, I don't think so. I don't like it. And they argue each other, and the debate is going nowhere. There is hundreds of comments, and the issue is closed. 1 year later, there is another issue, same thing, same debate, same ideas, etc. The issue is closed, and there is a bunch of other issues that are closed as duplicate of those 2. So yeah, the question is still open. Here is an example. I will do the same as the issue. Here is an example. On the left, you have the Flutter syntax. On the right, the GSX equivalent. And if you look at the line 12 to 15, there is a bunch of character, and it's not easy to know where your widget ends. Let's imagine I want to select the row, copy the row to paste it somewhere else. I want to select the row. I start at line 3, but it's not obvious that I have to stop my selection at line 14, right? Because there is no closing tag. And in GSX, you know that because you have the closing row tag. There is also no repetition of child and children attributes. And if you look at line 6 on the left, you have icon and icons with an S. Icon is a widget. Icons with an S is not. And the GSX equivalent, line 4, makes that really obvious. So I miss GSX for those reasons. But, oh yeah, I forgot to mention that when you develop in Flutter, actually you have a bunch of virtual command to tell you where your widget ends. But if you are in the IDE, that's good. But if you push your code and review pull request, you have this version, because those are not real commands. But okay, I respect all opinions, and I actually understand people when they say they prefer the other version, because if you know a little bit about Swift UI, for example, it's far more similar to the Flutter syntax. So I don't know if we will have JSX equivalent one day. What I know is it will be optional, and it will be community-driven. In all the comments on issue I mentioned earlier, there is a bunch of official comments from the Flutter team, and they are not against the idea. No, they haven't said no. They just say, we don't work on that. So hopefully sometimes we will maybe have a JSX one day. There are a bunch of projects that people have created, experimental projects, and it shows that it works already. At the same time, I miss JSX today less than I missed JSX at the beginning, because I got used to syntax, obviously, but also because the syntax has evolved to make declaration of widget easier. Dart has evolved. So you can have if and for statements directly into arrays, for example. You also have spread operator to directly to insert some result of a map inside your list view children, etc. And final point is cross-platform framework. When you declare a component, in React Native, and you run that on a device, you will have the Android component for your React component. For example, if it's a slider, you will display the Android slider on Android, and on iOS, it will be the iOS slider from the UI kit. And that's good because the user is getting what he is used to see. The trade-off is you don't fully control your UI. It could be different between iOS and Android. In Flutter, it's different. You have two sets of widgets, Material for Android and Cupertino for iOS, and those packages contain widgets that implement the user are used to see on iOS in Cupertino, and the user are used to see on Android with Material. But the widget determines the UI, not the device. So what if you want to create a cross-platform application that do what React Native does by default? You have to wrap all your components with a if statement, and if the platform is Android, you render the widget from Cupertino. If the platform is, with Material, and if you are on iOS, you run the widget for Cupertino. Good news is you have a third-party plugin to do that, so it's possible, but still it's come from a third-party library. What if you want a unified design? And that's my case, and that's probably like the case of other people too. You are supposed to use not the Material app or the Cupertino app, but the widgets app that come from the widget package. But then it's a lower level widget, and the same for other widgets. You don't have any temp support, and you don't have scaffolding. Scaffold is a very handy component to quickly design the part of your screens, like the navigation bar at the bottom, the app bar with the title, the drawer on the left, drawer on the right, whatever you want. So you have to implement this by yourself, and it means basically creating your top-level set of widgets, custom for your need. So what we do, what I do instead, that's what I do. That's not what I recommend, because I haven't answered that question yet, to be honest. What I do is I use Material package, so the Android flavored widget, and I unmaterialize them. I make them less a la Google, you know. So I use the customization to create my own widget based on the material widget, but looks different. So I have to come up with my custom design system. That trade-off is balanced with the fact that I work with a design system which is great. But still, it's a bit weird if you think about it. Okay, wrapping time. I know this company in Montreal, the first one who used Flutter in production for their main business. And at some point, they decided to stop using Flutter and switch back to React Native. And when I got that, I was surprised. I thought, oh, okay, interesting. And the reason is because they couldn't find any Flutter developer. And indeed, I have some LinkedIn job alerts on both Flutter and React Native. And in React Native, I receive like 2 or 3 job positions in Montreal per week. And in Flutter, it's more 2 or 3 per month for the whole Canada. So indeed, nobody's branded themselves as Flutter developer yet. But that was a mistake, actually, I think, because like I said, an experienced React Native developer like me is able to quickly onboard in Flutter. His knowledge is not wasted. So being a senior React Native developer makes you a senior Flutter developer. And I believe it's the same at different level, maybe, if you come from other background. I believe that if you are an Android developer or an iOS developer, native one, I mean, you are also able to quickly onboard in Flutter. The learning curve is not that difficult because whatever your background is, you already know something. I work with a Java developer in my team, pure backend Java developer, and they are able to work with me with Flutter. And they may struggle with different things, but I'm also struggle with different fields that they don't. So for example, if you come from Java, the object-oriented programming model stronger than JavaScript makes things easier in Dart. You also know about generics. If you saw list of objects with the generics character, it's familiar. If you come from iOS, SwiftUI, like I said, is very similar to as the declarative syntax in Flutter. If you come from Kotlin, the name argument I mentioned earlier, I had to learn is exactly the same, etc., etc. If I look in the mirror and I imagine I have to work with React Native again, I'm like, really? Thank you for your question. I come to that at the end of the talk. Yeah, painful upgrade. I went through all the React Native version, and each time it's kind of a pain in the ass to update the iOS and Android application, etc. Navigation, the state of navigation in React Native is quite messy. There are a lot of breaking change as well if you want to upgrade React navigation, etc. Oops. Runtime performance. I'm not saying that React Native is not performant. I'm saying that you have to keep attention to the runtime performance in your app. And in Flutter, you don't have that concern in mind. However, React Native is not dead, and there is a lot of things going on with React Native. A total redesign of the architecture is coming, so let's see in the future. At the opposite, I'm very enthusiastic about Flutter. It is carried by a major actor in the mobile industry, Google. That's the first cross-platform framework to be in that situation. So it's close to Android, it's close to Firebase. I remember some update in the material design specification, and there was an update on some best practices, etc. And the Android SDK was released at the same time with those new things. And there were a new version of Flutter immediately as well. Flutter is the result of years of trying time. So all the difficulty I went through in React Native, I don't go through in Flutter because it comes later. So for example, at the beginning, React Native wasn't supporting Cocoa pods, and now they are. And Flutter directly support Cocoa pods. Same thing with the auto-linking in Android. You have that concept in Flutter. And yeah, that's it. I'm compare the state of the ecosystem right now as the state of React. When React was released, there were a lot of different Flux implementation, and then Redux put everybody on the same line. And that is not, I'm waiting for the Redux equivalent in Flutter, I mean, by popularity. So yeah, I'm really enthusiastic about Flutter. I hope you are too after my presentation. Yeah, thank you. I will answer the question in the chat. If you want to follow me on Reddit, username and Cuillery. I also have a Twitter account with the same username, but I actually more active on Reddit. So yeah, you can follow me on Reddit. You can follow people on Reddit, by the way. Nobody doing that, but it's possible. Okay, let's answer the question. I have 5 minutes left. Sorry for the technical issue at the beginning. So yeah, Tristan, declarative UI is also my pain point. Yeah, that's it. To balance that, Flutter is achieving a great things. It gathers developers from every background. React native developer are eager to ramp up on Flutter, and that's the first cross-platform framework that's doing that, in my opinion. If you tell an iOS developer about React Native, he's like, ugh. But if you tell an iOS developer about Flutter, it's like, we'll see. Even after unmaterialization, could Apple reject apps for not cooperating or acting of looking? I'm not too worried about that because most of the UI guidelines are actually more UX guidelines. So when it's come to the design, you have less chance to be. I have notification Reddit. Hey, you have a new follower. That's great. You guys are awesome. So no, I'm not worried about that. But honestly, I can say because my app is still under development, but I haven't heard too much feedback about that. There is also FlutterWeb. Yeah, I haven't spoken about FlutterWeb. It's not SEO friendly. I honestly not sure if it will become SEO friendly one day. FlutterWeb. I don't think FlutterWeb will be made for website, public website with SEO and stuff. I see FlutterWeb for web application that are behind a login or whatever. Is Flutter a future language? And is Flutter good complete for web development as React.js? The language is good. The framework is good. The API is good. I love it. And I also heard some feedback about people that learn Flutter and use it for the web directly without knowing anything about JavaScript and CSS, etc. And they like it so far, but honestly, it's too early to make that move, in my opinion. It's a bit risky because we don't really know what Flutter Web will become. Do you miss functional programming and hooks? Not really. And there is a package hooks maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's the same author as provider. So he has released a package, very prolific guy, by the way. He has released a package for hooks. I think it's him. So you can use hooks with Flutter. I don't know exactly what it's look like, but it sounds similar. I do miss JavaScript when it's come to, I don't know, there is a solid object model. So sometimes when you want to just access to the key of an object, you can't. There is no reflection in Flutter. There is a reflection in Dart, but not in Flutter. So sometimes I miss JavaScript, yeah. Okay, it's 9 o'clock, so I guess thank you again for joining. It was my first remote conference. Sorry for the technical issue at the beginning, and I hope I give you some takeaways from that. Thank you, guys. Awesome. Bye-bye.